All right, so you guys just talked a lot about care plans and goals. So how, are people familiar with SMART goals? Raise your hand if you know what they are and ad nauseum and just like really sick of them. Okay, some people are saying that they could use a little more review. We're going to do something short on SMART goals. But you know, the way I think about SMART goals is the idea is to try to set the person up to succeed, right? So our typical medical model sets us up to fail always, all the time, right? Because we go into the doctor for our yearly checkup, not for everyone, but for many people, you know, what do they say? You know, you got to eat better, you got to start exercising, you got to maybe start taking some medication, and you need to lose like, you know, anywhere between 10 and 30 pounds. You know, that's a fair statement for many Americans, right? And I'll see you in 6 months or a year, and you know, I'm sure that you will have achieved that. And do any of us really ever achieve that? Most of us. Sometimes, but generally we're failing, right? That's why we're all, not us in the room, but we as a country are in the situation that we're in because we're just set up to fail. There's no guidance on how to do these things. So SMART goals really get at a way to help people succeed. And then by succeeding, you feel good, you build your self-efficacy. What's self-efficacy? Sometimes it's also called health confidence. So self-efficacy is about whether or not I believe that I can do something and make the change, how confident I feel. So if I'm gonna start running and training for a marathon, how confident do I feel that I can actually achieve that within whatever my time frame is, 10 years, or 10 years, 1 year. And you know, maybe I'm, it would take me like 20 years, like I'm just not a runner, but that would never be a goal for me. But I might be really confident that I can do that, or I might be not so confident. And if I'm not so confident, then it's not gonna happen, right? So that's the idea of self-efficacy. So the acronym is specific, right? We're helping people, you guys talked about the end vision, the lifetime vision, maybe it's a year from now, maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's somewhere in between. What are we gonna do today, specifically? And then it's gotta be something measurable. So how do I know when I succeed? I need to be able to come to the end point and say, like, I've done it, I've done this, and good for me. Action-oriented, that sort of speaks for itself, and attainable. So we talked about, you guys were just talking about this. Someone said it has to be realistic, right? And that's when, even though these are coming from the people you work with, our role as like a coach or someone working with them is to kind of help them decide if it's realistic, right? Because sometimes we sit down with people and they're like, I'm gonna do all these things. And you know, even within our own life, think about like people you know in your family and your friends, and you might say, I'm not sure. Do you really think that you can do that? Do you really think that that's realistic? And then time limited. So again, about this measuring. I'm gonna do this for 2 weeks. I'm gonna do this for 3 weeks. I'm gonna do it for a month. I'm gonna do it for 2 days, right? Whatever they decide, so that again, they can measure it and they can get a sense of success. So in your packet, you have a worksheet that says SMART or not. These are really simple and kind of funny. But you can work by yourself just very quickly or with someone next to you, whatever makes you happy. And you're just going to decide if these are examples of SMART goals or if they're not. And for the ones that aren't, just use the space underneath to come up with something creative to make it an example of what a SMART goal might look like. And then we'll just quickly review that, and then I will send you to lunch. Hey, even if you haven't had an opportunity to rewrite every single one, let's just look at a few of these as a group. So exercise more, like run every day. Smart or not? No. Not smart. So what's an example of how we could reframe that?
Like maybe go for a walk for 10 minutes after lunch or something.
Sure. I'm going to go for a walk for 10 minutes after lunch for
15 days.
for 15 days or for whatever, right? Depends, everything, this is all negotiable, right? So the story I always love to tell is I actually exercise a lot, and except when I'm on like these weeks where I don't do any exercise, except for what I'm doing here. And I do classes at my gym, and there's the faithful people that you see, like I become friends with them just through the classes. And January 1st, the classes start getting really full, and the gym always starts to like, oh, you gotta call ahead and reserve a spot, or you gotta get there 20 minutes early to get a spot. And then all the people who are always going to the classes, we're looking at each other and we're like, okay, by February 15th, the class will be empty again, right? And it's funny, but sure enough, every February 15th, the class goes back to, the people who were there before, and maybe one or two people, right? And I always am thinking to myself, my public health view, these were not SMART goals that these people were setting for themselves. They were just like, I'm gonna go to the gym every single day and work out till I feel like I'm gonna throw up, and that should be sustainable. So anyway. So go to the drop-in center more often to take a shower and check in with my care coordinator.
Too vague.
A little too vague, okay, how could you change it?
How often?
Yeah.
Okay, so give it more specifics, right? So go to the drop-in center
Every other day.
every other day to take a shower and check in with my care coordinator when I'm there for 2 weeks or whatever, right? Find housing.
Way too vague.
Right, way too big. So what would be something manageable for someone?
I'll look at Craigslist once per day and call at least 3 listings by Friday.
Great, perfect, love that. You seem to have experience with this one. Start taking my medications and alert the pharmacy when I'm running low. Smart or not?
Not
No.
vague.
How can we fix it?
Take your medications daily.
Okay,
Alert my pharmacy 3 days before I run out.
okay, right, so defining what running low means, right, and that might mean different, what?
For most, I would be out.
Right, and depends, I would imagine for some of you who work in more rural areas, that might be different than if you're in New York City and I realized I ran out of my medication, I can probably get it in 20 minutes.
Mail order, must be nice.
We have other problems.
Yes. And I can actually get it delivered too, usually in New York
Well,
City.
we can get that.
Anyway, okay, yeah. So the next one is a woman that I used to work with who had diabetes. Reduce the number of bowls of ice cream I eat at night from 3 to 1 for 2 weeks.
That's smart.
Yeah. So the woman I worked with, she came to, she told me that she was eating, it was actually a quart of ice cream. She was eating a quart of ice cream every night, and she identified that as the problem. In my view, there were, just like all of you, your people at your work, there were many other issues, right? But that was the one she felt she wanted to work on, so it was great. And she immediately went to, I'm just gonna stop eating that. How hard could it be? Most people don't eat a quart of ice cream at night every time they go to bed. And I was like, I hear you, yeah, that's probably true. But then when we started talking about like how realistic does she think that is? Does she really think she can tonight not have, she said no, not really. So she said she thought she could do a pint instead of a quart. And we tried that for a week, and I followed up with her, and she was doing well. So after another week, she put it down to like a small bowl. And then after another week, she was done, and she actually was able to sustain that for a while and able to move on to the next piece. Yeah.
So now that you're describing and you're using quarts and pints, if you look at this, it really isn't a smart goal because the bowl could get bigger and bigger and bigger. You get what I'm saying?
Yes. Yes, we have to be careful with things like that, right. That's a good point. But, those are always the hidden ways that we define things, right? So skip down to call my daughter twice a week to see how she is doing and tell her that I love and miss her. Almost there, right? Maybe I'll do that for a week or 2 weeks, right? Okay. So why is it so important that the person you're working with is really the one coming up with these? Right, so we've said this 100 times, I'm not gonna belabor the point, because if they, right, adults in general we're self-directed. There's something in our nature where we don't really like being told what to do. Think about yourself, right? And so when it comes from us and we decide, then we are all more likely to be able to do it and to feel that motivation. The really important part with this that often doesn't happen is helping people assess how confident they feel that they can do it. So oftentimes what I've seen is literally you could just draw a line with a 1 and a 10 and say if 1 is, you're not confident that you could do it, and 10 is the most, where do you fall? And that's a nice visual way to have to help somebody, look at it and think about it. You can also ask them, again, depending on some literacy stuff. And then one thing we haven't talked about that's essential to these goals and the work that you're all doing. Anyone know what I'm thinking of? After they set this goal and it's been a week or 2 weeks, what do I have to do?
Check in.
Follow up, yeah. And that's what's so wonderful about the programs that you're all working in, because most times in a healthcare setting, no one's gonna do that, right? There's no way that anyone's gonna call people. But I, as someone who worked through grant funding on a lot of types of programs like this, I would call people and they were just, you probably have this experience too, they just couldn't believe that I was actually calling them. Right, I would ask permission, I would say, I'm gonna call you, is that all right, in a week, just like we talked about, and see how you're doing. Or if, it was something different, I'd say, I'm gonna call you tomorrow and see if you got started with that, okay? And they literally, they couldn't even speak. They were speechless that I actually did what I said and followed up. Because how often does that happen for most of us in the healthcare system? We really only get a call, at least I only get a call when something is really wrong, right? I don't get a follow-up on, how's that going with that new medication? Or, did you get to that physical therapy? I have a rotator cuff issue, and I couldn't believe it. I went to the specialist in New Jersey where I live, and the doctor recommended that I get physical therapy, and he actually asked me if that was something that I had the time to do. And I nearly fell out of my seat because it was the first time that, and it wasn't this whole long thing here, but it was the first time that someone actually had asked me if that was something realistic for my life. I couldn't believe it. It was amazing. So before we go to lunch, what are other thoughts about this? And what's challenging about this? Yeah.
General question is around goals when it's another member of the team, not the patient that's doing goals, but the other members of the team, and sometimes assumptions being made that they're gonna follow
Yes.
through, and it's who doesn't follow through?
So that the other team members don't follow through with what they're supposed to do.
Or it's such a huge barrier, where do you put that in the plan? If someone doesn't have stable housing, you could build a goal around the person to call a housing trust or something like that, but if your ultimate success is whether or not the person has stable housing in a year,
Yeah.
you might never get there. 'Cause,
Right, so with something so it's really tricky, right? Something like housing is a national, I don't know if the word epidemic is the right word, but it seems to almost apply. And that is I don't even know what to say about that, because sometimes they're never going to get stable housing, and we might know that, and they might know that. So you got to do the best you can, and whatever we think the best kind of situation for them is going to look like. And also working, and then maybe helping steer them in the direction of goals that they do feel will be achievable. But I hear you. There are some things which is infuriating about the work that we're all doing that we just don't have control over. I'm not a builder. I'm not a politician, so I'm not going to be building, affordable housing for, 6 million people tomorrow. And if they're not there, it's just not there. Does anyone else? I'm not a housing expert. Does anyone else want to say anything else about that?
I said this at our training yesterday, but there's a really fantastic book called Eviction by Matthew Desmond. I don't know if any of you have read it. I'm sorry, Evicted by Matthew Desmond, which is about the interplay of poverty and housing and the incredible amount of money that's being made off of, housing or for poor people and evicting people. And anyway, they look at Milwaukee, but they talk about this as a microcosm of all across the country. And just with the work that you do, I would recommend you read it. It's it's sad, but enlightening as well.
And Evicted.
Evicted by Matthew Desmond.
Actually, my parents, they sent it to me through Amazon. I got it in the mail the other day.
And it's sadly a page turner, it's someone actually lived with a whole bunch of people who were in and out of public housing.
So I think that goes into, I just had another thought that maybe the housing thing is not what's realistic for them, right? Or maybe it's a way to make where they currently are living a better situation.
It's like making that a part of the plan, at least as an identified structural,
Yeah.
systemic barrier to their
Yeah.
overall.
Absolutely.
If I can chime in, housing has to be, if someone has unstable housing, it most definitely has to be part of their plan, whether it's realistic or not. There are now very clear studies that show that if you could, for many people living in poverty with health issues, if you could solve their housing issues, like half of their health issues and mental health issues would go away. So again, we personally probably can't solve it, but it most definitely is related to their health and has to be in their plan.
And maybe their ultimate goal is housing, but maybe they need some job training or, an education. Maybe they need something else to ultimately be able to get to that housing. And I think that's where our role is tricky, because we don't want to force goals on them, but we also want to help them negotiate something that they can be successful at. So we're gonna go to lunch.